Hello and welcome. You join me stood in front of my Ford Thunderbird for a little bit of tinkering, specifically brake servo tinkering. Unfortunately, the brake servo on the T-Bird has stopped working, making the brakes incredibly hard to operate. So let's see if I can put this right. If I just open the bonnet, there's a suspect in question. The big silver dome thing is your brake servo, or brake booster, whatever you wish to call it, and as you can see there's the master cylinder bolted to it. Now I've already had a quick peek into the back of the master cylinder, just unbolted it from the servo, and I've noticed there is a slight leak. I suspect what's happened is brake fluid has leaked into the servo and has perished the seals or diaphragm, as brake fluid is corrosive, and the servo can no longer hold a vacuum, which is why it doesn't work. Anyway, enough rambling, let's get the car in the workshop and actually try and fix something. So first things first, the strut brace needs to be removed to give us some space. I'm going to try and be jammy and unbolt the master cylinder from the servo and then unscrew the brass block by rotating the master cylinder itself. Ideally I don't want to disturb the brake lines, as I know that they currently seal and don't leak from the brass block. Removing the connections from the brake light switch. So rotating the master cylinder worked and is now out the way with the brake lines undisturbed. Having a little peek into the servo, you can see brake fluid in there, which should certainly not be there at all. The servo should be dry, so the master cylinder has clearly leaked and needs replacing. And in true Blue Peter fashion, here's one I prepared earlier. Now you can get rebuild kits for these, but for what it costs for a new cylinder, it's not worth the time, and I know this will work straight out of the box. That's the brake light switch which I'll need to salvage, and here's the leaky end of the master cylinder, looking a bit grim. And here's the new cylinder, looking all nice and shiny. I may swap the caps over, as the silver one is more original looking, if it will fit. This is an aftermarket part, so it may not, but we'll see. Turning our attention back to the brake booster, we need to get it out, so off comes the vacuum line. Diving into the car, we need to get under the dash to undo 4 nuts to release the booster from the firewall, as well as disconnect the brake pedal. Starting with the brake pedal, we'll pop off this spring clip and slide the bar off the pin. These are the nuts that hold the brake booster to the firewall, to either side of the steering column. Now with a touch of jiggery pokery, the booster should come out. Well, there's the booster out. Unfortunately, you're up on the table as the workbench seems a little occupied with the cylinder head apart in many pieces. Whilst the booster is on the table like this, I thought it would be good to explain how the booster actually works. Why does it make the brakes easier to operate, and how does it do this? Essentially, the brake booster is just a vacuum operated piston. Inside the case is a piston that seals to the inner wall of the case. This seal prevents any air, or at least large amounts of it, travelling between the two sides of the piston. One side of the piston is connected to the brake pedal, whilst the other is connected to the master cylinder. As the brake pedal is pushed, the piston is pushed, and so the master cylinder is pushed. A vacuum line is connected to this port on the front, which opens into one half of the piston. The vacuum line is just a pipe that connects to the intake manifold on the engine. While the engine is running, it continually draws in air and draws air out of one side of the brake booster. It creates a vacuum on this side of the piston. A vacuum is just an area where the air pressure is lower than normal atmospheric pressure. Air pressure is the force that the air exerts on its surroundings. The air on the opposite side of the piston is exerting a force on its surroundings, including the piston itself, which can move. Because of the vacuum on the other side, there is no force to resist against the piston from sliding, so the piston is pushed by the force of the atmospheric pressure. A common misconception with vacuum systems is that there is some sort of suction force that pulls on the piston. This is not technically correct. It's the force of the atmospheric pressure pushing the piston that has little resistance created by the vacuum. A return spring is often placed inside the booster, so that the piston returns once the brake pedal is released. If the return spring fails, it would likely mean the brakes would stick on. If the seal around the piston fails, it would mean the air pressure either side of the piston would become the same, and so the forces either side would also become the same, making the piston ineffective, which I believe is what we're about to see with my brake booster. Let's go ahead and open this up. This is a Midland Ross style brake booster, so it has 10 of these screws holding the two halves together. Not all Thunderbirds had this style of booster. Some had a Bendix style booster which has a steel band clamp that holds the two halves together. That's all the screws out, so theoretically this should just pop apart. May need a little assistance from a trusty screwdriver. A bit rusty at the bottom, may be caused by the brake fluid if it has got in that far. Ooh, that's not too clever at all. None of this fluid should be in here at all. And that would be our problem. The diaphragm has gone proper Pete Tong. There is an industry technical term to describe the condition of this. I believe it starts with an F and a U and ends in KED. Let's try and get the piston out. We'll start with disconnecting the back of the piston by removing this spring clip and clevis pin. Now the piston should pull out. Well, that's the piston assembly out. Next I'll need to clean everything and get all that brake fluid out, and then look into changing the diaphragm out for a much healthier one. I think here would be a great place to end part 1, but please do join me for part 2, where hopefully we can start piecing things back together. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in part 2.